Be in bed by 9 p.m. No phones at the dinner table. Finish your homework. Do your chores. All these rules. Do we really need them? There are tons of rules that we need to abide by on a daily basis. For as long as human civilization has been around, there have been rules, and people who have wanted to break those rules. If you've ever wanted to rebel against a rule, you're not alone. We all get the urge to rebel against rules that we feel restrict our freedom. There are plenty of rules that we probably don't want to follow, but we can't exactly throw tantrums when we don't get what we want, can we? Everyone responds differently. You might push back on almost every rule, just because you want to. Or maybe you find it easy to obey most rules. But no matter how you deal with them, at some point you're going to face a rule that you really don't like. A rule that makes you feel caged. Now maybe you've already experienced this, where it felt like a rule was restricting your freedom. Maybe it was a curfew, a dress code, who you weren't allowed to hang out with, your phone restrictions, or maybe it was something that God has told us to do or not to do. One of the most frustrating things about being a teenager is often feeling that you're stuck between childhood and adulthood, dependence and independence, between rules and freedom. You might think you're ready for more freedom, but there are still a lot of rules and adults that you're going to have to obey in the meantime. So what do we do about the rules that we don't want to follow? How do we handle our frustration about not being as free as we want to be? And if we look to the Bible for help, is it just going to tell us to obey, no questions asked? When some people think about God, they think about a long list of rules. And rules that don't really feel very important or relevant to their lives. And I can get that, especially during the teenage years when we're fighting for freedom and independence. God can sometimes seem like just another person who's telling us what to do. But in this series, we're going to meet someone who had a lot to say about rules. And that person is James, the half-brother of Jesus. After Jesus resurrected, James dove headfirst into spreading the good news of the gospel. He even became the leader of the Church of Jerusalem, a faith community made up of Jewish people who began to follow Jesus. James grew up in a Jewish culture, which had a lot of rules. There were obvious rules like don't kill anyone, but there were also hundreds of other rules too, like don't wear clothes made of more than one kind of fabric, or pork meat is considered unclean, so say goodbye to bacon. Maybe it seems weird that God would give all of these rules, but they had a purpose. Some of these rules kept the Jewish people safe and healthy, and others set them apart from the other nations. Others taught them how to live peacefully with each other, and many rules helped them stay connected with God. These rules served a purpose, but after Jesus showed up, the Jewish people who followed him began to realize that things had begun to change. Because Jesus had made things right between them and God, they weren't required to follow all these rules anymore. Or were they? James wrote them a letter to help explain. So we read in James chapter 1, verse 22 to 25. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. We can break down what James says in this passage into 3 statements. Number 1, we should do what God says. Secondly, God's word helps us see ourselves clearly. And thirdly, following God's law gives us freedom. Now maybe you're thinking, how is it possible to get freedom from following a law? Don't laws keep you trapped and controlled? How can a law set you free? Well, the law that James is talking about is not the list of hundreds of laws that the Jewish people had followed for so long. When Jesus was still on earth, he introduced a new rule that would take the place of those hundreds of old rules. This new rule changed everything. See, Jesus shared this new rule when he was being interrogated by the religious leaders who really loved their rules. Those leaders were passionate about following every detail of the Jewish law, thinking that it would make them right, holy, and loved by God. So when these leaders asked Jesus to name the most important law of God, they were expecting him to name a law that they already knew. But Jesus gave them a brand new law instead. In Matthew chapter 22, verse 35 to 40, it says, "One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question. 'Teacher, "Which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments." Here's what Jesus had to say about God's rules. There are two that matter most. Love God and love others as yourself. That's it. When Jesus said all the law hangs on these two commandments, he was saying that if you truly love God and others, then you're already following God's law. When we love God and others, we're doing what God says. Love is how we do something about God's word rather than just hearing it. When we love God and others, we see ourselves more clearly. Like a mirror, the command to love God and others shows us just how well we're following God's law. Even if we follow every rule exactly, if we're not loving God and others, then we're not following God's law. And when we follow this law, we find freedom. The religious leaders at the time believed that you had to follow hundreds or thousands of rules in order for God to love and accept you. But Jesus came to free us from that. Under Jesus' new law, the law of love, two things are changed. We learned that we don't have to do anything in order to earn or keep God's love because we are already loved. And we learned that we don't have to follow thousands of rules if we just follow one: love. Now, a few minutes ago, I mentioned that some rules make us feel caged. Those kinds of rules make us feel like we've lost our freedom, but the right rules are like keys, not cages. Jesus' rule is the rule of love, and the rule of love sets us free. God isn't about giving us rules that make us feel like prisoners. The rules that He gives us are designed to set us free. Free from trying to earn His love, free from trying to be perfect, free from trying to follow a long list of rules, and free to love and be loved by the God who made us. The key to freedom is the rule of love. And when we follow it, we discover that the right rules set us free. So can we stop obeying our curfews? Can we ignore our school's dress code? Can we do whatever we want? Well, no. Will God still love us if we broke the rules? Yes. But by doing whatever we wanted, would we be loving God and others? No. In Tokyo, the Shibuya crossing is the busiest pedestrian crossing in the world. There are very strict rules that govern when people, bikes, and vehicles can cross. You might have to stand and wait for a few minutes before you get a chance to cross the street. But do you think that anyone thinks that these rules take away their freedom? Of course not. At this intersection, it's easy to see how the right rules set us free to cross the street without fear. In the same way, the law of love doesn't take away our freedom either. Doing whatever we want can lead us to hurt ourselves, hurt others, and live with a lifetime of regrets. But Jesus' law of love sets us free. So what does this law look like in our everyday lives? Well, first of all, there's loving others. We've mentioned a lot of rules that feel restrictive, unreasonable, and unfair. But what if we thought about these rules differently? Instead of telling our parents that the curfew is stupid, what if we asked, how can I love my parents better? Maybe I can arrive home earlier so that they don't stay up all night worrying where I am. Instead of thinking, it's not a big deal if I text and drive, what if instead we asked ourselves, how can I better love the people around me? Following these laws is a simple way that we can protect each other from harm. Instead of deciding that the church is outdated with its ideas on relationships, what if we asked ourselves, what does it mean to truly love the person that I am dating? Maybe loving someone means being kind, selfless, patient, and wise rather than doing whatever we want to in the heat of the moment. And then secondly, loving God. See, the rule of loving others is a helpful way to make decisions regardless of what you believe. But Jesus gave us the law of love for a reason that's bigger than just being kind to each other. Above all, Jesus wants us to love God. So if following God ever makes you feel caged instead of free, what if you asked yourself, how do God's rules help me love Him more? How do they help me stay close to Him? How do they give me a chance to love God by loving others? And how do they give me a chance to trust and obey God even when I don't understand? Over the next few weeks, we're going to speak about the relationship between rules and freedom, but we needed to start here, understanding the rule of love. God's laws set us free to love God, to love others, and to love ourselves. And God's laws help us to see that no matter what we've done, God's love for us never fails. Although there will always be rules that we don't like, that we don't understand, or that we don't agree with, we need to understand that the right rules can set us free. And according to Jesus, the greatest rule is love.